Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary. And I will disclose that you were good enough to come to my office yesterday. Some of these questions are going to be the same things we talked about, but I thought it was important to put some of this on the public record. And I would just thank you in advance for your patience, and the committee as well. I have a few questions, and if the committee would indulge me. This is a very important issue in my district. It's a very significant employer, and frankly, there's a very high degree of frustration in Westmoreland County regarding how this matter was handled. Now, that doesn't reflect on you or your department because you had nothing to do with that. But if you could you describe, in conjunction with SCI Greensburg, DGS plan going forward, assuming that this plan is approved?
I can, and we're doing the same thing through SCI Crescent also. And for all our projects that we're looking at selling, we have really tried to take a more proactive stance within the community and within the General Assembly to try and get feedback from each of you in your areas as well as the local people involved to try and see what the feedback is on the needs for this for any of the properties, but specifically in Greensburg. We need to get it approved in the surplus plan to be able to actually market the property and start moving forward, because if it's not approved on the plan, we don't have the ability to spend money to do that. Right now, we can talk to people, we can set up tours and do things within corrections limits because of the prisoners that are still there. But we really need that ability to be able to go forth and sell it and market it. It's the best thing to try and help each of the communities. While we're doing that, though, we are talking to the local officials and, again, the General Assembly to say if there's any feedback from people that have heard information where they said, hey, we heard there's somebody looking around for a new facility for some reason, whether it's a school, whether it's whatever the case may be, would you help us, talk to them? We cherish those conversations because that's the best starting point for us. In addition to the marketing to get the word out there, it puts the boots on the ground in the local communities. And we want to see, we've also, again, on Greensburg, we're working with the other agencies, and DCED has Community and Economic Development. DCED has really, they said they've worked with us. In fact, one of the things that they had talked to the township and the borough there about is the early intervention grant, and they said they wanted them to apply for that and file the actual paperwork. They've been in discussions with them. We haven't actually gotten that paperwork yet, but it gives DCED an ability to work with the people in the community. There may be other grants and things that if we find a business or something that wants to buy it or change it or do whatever, develop it, that we can work with them and help to provide something through DCED. That's a big push in us trying to work with them, but we first have to get somebody in the door that may be interested in it. One of the other things when we're talking to people, and we've had other properties where there have been issues too, where there's some things that they just say, this just can't happen because it would be detrimental in the community, and that's what we want to make sure that doesn't happen, because obviously what we do, we want to be something that's going to help to revitalize the community after the closures.
Thank you. And in response to Representative Dunbar's question, you mentioned the federal prison authorities, and again, we talked about that yesterday. And my understanding was the federal prison authorities are not interested because some guidelines with regard to cell size, the cells are too small at SCI Greensburg. I'll just state this, our local officials are concerned that, again, we have a 40-year-old prison that can't serve as a prison. With regard to marketability and with regard to fair market value, obviously there's some issues there. Fair market value on the property, the SCI Greensburg, you listed at about $1.5 million. Could you describe how that number was arrived at?
That's something it's part of the, when the procedures were enacted in the law for the surplus property plan, we're required to put that in there. We're not very excited about it because I don't know if you've ever heard the acronym WAG. It's truly a guess. It's basically our folks in real estate based on things they've seen in the past. For the prisons, we don't have a lot of experience with prisons, so that one's not, it's not like there's a lot of comps out there in a prison. This is not an actual appraisal number because we can't do that until we get the approval to sell it to be able to spend the money and things like that. So again, that's just a number to say, okay, we looked at it more to say, okay, how much land is there? What may be the value of the land, and to throw a number on it. But we truly, it's a guess that comes from our folks. They have they have experience with real estate, but again, prisons that's a little different. It's not like a house or a building that we've been used to seeing. So it's not anything scientific, I will say that.
Understand. And again, as we discussed, one of the options local officials are strongly urging is that this property be demolished so the real estate then can be marketed. Could you comment on the options in connection with demolition, costs, et cetera, on that?
Yeah, we've put together some estimated costs in demolition for Greensburg, and it's we had spoken to other states that had recent demos of buildings, and our estimate is about $14 million. And again, that's just based on some of the feedback we've gotten from another state that we had talked to. The process for that, because that is a capital project, it's over $300,000, so it would need to go into a capital plan budget and get approved, and then it would have to be approved in the next round of capital projects to actually get the money to do the demolition of that.
And the documentation you provided, the carrying costs you estimated are $2 million a year. Could you comment on how that number was arrived at?
And that was provided through Department of Corrections. We get estimates that the carrying costs the agencies still carry until we sell the property. So they have that based on their costs that they incur on a regular basis for the property. And so we got that through the Department of Corrections.
And
feedback.
Who would pay that $2 million per year?
That would be Department of Corrections.
Are they obligated?
Or whoever owns, in Greensburg's case, it would be due to Corrections.
And is DOC obligated to continue to carry that cost year by year?
The obligations with Corrections, at some point in time, if we're not pushing to sell the building, if we're not actively selling it, and they run out of money, it could be an issue with the heating costs. We've seen that in buildings in the past where the heating costs are just so astronomical, and if they don't have the money to do that, that can be a problem. We don't do that originally, but afterwards we would have to look at that. Corrections would have to look at that to say, okay, is that money they have that they can afford to spend? And
then what happens if DOC decides 2 or 3 years down the road that they're not going to pay $2 million a year? What happens? Does DGS start paying that, or does it just the building not heated in that case?
Then it may not be heated. They're required to do, they're still having security in the building and trying to take care of the property around the building, but heating costs are a big portion of it, and it's just the minimal amount of heat to keep things from freezing and being destroyed. It's in everybody's best interest to get it sold before they would not heat it, but so we try to keep the heat going on there in any property until we can sell it.
And I know I'm probably taking too much time. 1 or 2 additional questions, and I'll conclude. Does say 3 years out, this property has not been sold. Does your process change at all? Particularly if the Department of Corrections decides that they can't afford to continue to maintain the building?
Does our process change? No, we continue to try to sell it in the best way we can. One of the things you had talked about, we may look at it in a property to say, okay, does it warrant being demolition? We may work with community groups in different ways again. We have Phillipsburg State Hospital is a good example. That one's been on the books for a long time. I really want to try and see that property taken care of. So we've been aggressively actually working with the other agencies, DCD, some community groups on that to say, okay, what's the best way that we can handle this property? Is it through demolition or whatever? There's already been vandalism at that property. It's been around for a long time. So our process is the same, although we may just do some different, again, if it gets to the point where something doesn't sell, we may be saying, all right, now we need to look at demolition and what's the best way to do that and what's the plan afterwards.
All right, and then one final question, and as we discussed, typical in these situations, there's lots of rumors in the local community about deals that have been made or may have been made or people suspect of being made. like you give the opportunity. There were two particular entities that local community has wondered about whether there has been contact with UPMC or Highmark in conjunction with the purchase of this property, and you gave me an answer yesterday. I'd like you to have an opportunity to state that publicly.
No, they have not contacted us. We've heard nothing from them. The first time I heard their name come up was from Senator Ward when she made a comment about not wanting them there, but I wasn't sure why. I didn't understand that, and we've asked questions about that since that time, but and of you also yesterday. But
And we discussed that some yesterday, but I wanted to make clear that you have an opportunity to answer that question. If I could just make a quick comment, Mr. Chairman.
You're in order.
Our concern locally and why our local officials have been pushing for demolition is this is a prison, and it can't be used as a prison now from what we understand. So what value does a prison have that can't be used as a prison? I hope there is a value, and I hope this can be sold. Our concern is 3 or 4 years from now, we've put $8 million of state money into this, and we still are in a position where it only can be marketed or either given away or marketed with the building demolished, which is why the local officials have been so concerned about this, and particularly why their judgment it would be better to pay that $14 million now. I understand that's another process, but again, I think I understand their concerns. They are valid, and I just hope in 4 or 5 years we're not still talking about what we're going to do with SCI Greensburg. But thank you very much for your patience.
one thing just to respond to that is, or two things related to that is, it's not always easy to see what options are available until you kind of have that thread that's handed to you. And 2 different points I'll make on Greensburg. One was with Crescent. We have an interest in Crescent that is completely unrelated to a prison, and they still want the prison there, and they're working around the buildings that are there. It's completely unrelated, and again, until we got that thread, we didn't know about that, but we're working with the people on that now. On Greensburg, another comment that had been made, and we have not been able to market like this, because again, until we have the approval, we can't go forward in that process. But in the past, I've been told that there was an interest from some of the movie organizations out west that wanted to use a prison for different filming rights, for filming things, and they were interested in buying a prison that was an older prison for some of those things. That's something we've already spoken to DCED about with their connections because of film credits and things that we haven't been involved in, to say, okay, help us when we have this ability so that we can talk to these people and see if maybe there is an interest. Again, until we start doing the marketing and putting that out there, we can't pursue that, but it was something that was discussed, and apparently in the past when the prison was open, there were questions asked about if there's ever any intent to get rid of that prison. So that may or may not pan out, but I'm just saying that there are options sometimes that are out there that just because it's a prison doesn't mean that it can't be used for some other purpose or some other reason.
Well, I would certainly please ask you to keep us informed if any of these contacts, particularly that one. And just thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the members of the committee for their patience, and Secretary, you for your patience as well. Thank you.